Okay, welcome back after a long break. It's been 3 weeks.
Ben Zmanim.
Ben Zmanim, biduk. And next week is Tekes Mavar at this time, so we'll either do it later in the week or not do it next week, we'll have to see.
We'll see.
But we are in the middle of Masechet Makot. So this week, Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, we are discussing a topic around the power of words. And in particular, in the thought of Chazal, so words are very important, right? When we say things, and the question is, when Chazal say that your words are mashpia, are they saying it in the sense of supernatural? Like if you say something that you're able to actually affect some spiritual something, maybe to create some angels or destructive angels or good angels and actually change the world that way. The famous idea is maybe the golem, right? You can actually utter words, abracadabra, which is abracadabra, actually, it's Aramaic, where you can actually create something that's able to move with your speech, like mystical. Or is the idea more rational, practical, right? That your words, they have an influence in the sense that when you speak, that there's consequences to the things that you say, and you don't necessarily know the full impact of those words. And you know, one of the classic examples of this is around the idea of names. That throughout Chazal, you have machlokot between Tanaim and Amorim about Shema Garim or Lo Garim. Right? Does a person's name actually affect their personality or not? So we'll be talking about this idea of Kalalat Chacham, that what happens when somebody utters a curse. But the curse is bechinam in the sense that it's an empty curse, or it's not a curse that has any foundation. So we'll see Chazal develop this idea that despite the fact that it's empty, it still is tofes, because Chacham said it. And we'll see the examples get a bit more and more extreme until the last example is, I think, a pretty crazy one. So we'll end with that one. Okay, let's start. Makot Afilo Amud Aleph. Can you please just say quietly? Thank you. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Kilat Chacham Afilu B'chinam Hi Ba'a. Okay, so Rav taught, as we just said, the curse of a wise man comes true or comes to pass even if it's bechinam, meaning even if it's not actualized. We'll see an example of this right now. What does that mean? Minalan me'achitofel. Achitofel, right, who was an advisor in the days of David HaMelech. This is a famous midrash. Shebasha shekara David shitin. So when David was starting to prepare the ground for the Beit HaMikdash, kafa to'oma. So he dug in the place of where the Beit HaMikdash was going to be, and the depths swelled up, because that's where the Even HaShtiyah is, and that's where the center of the earth is. It was threatened to flood the world. Ba'al lemishtafal alma. He was going to flood the world. Amar, ma'al lichtov shem achaspa umishda b'tahoma deleiku aduchte. So David HaMelech had a shaila. He said, "Are you allowed to write Shem Hashem on a chaspa, on a piece of like a piece of pottery, and then throw it into the depths, and the Shem Hashem will suppress the water and make sure they don't come and flood the world." Leika damar lemidei, and there was no one who knew to tell him whether it was allowed or not. Amar, he said, Kol hayodeh davar ze ve'eno omro yechanek bigrainai. So anybody who knows the answer to this shaila but doesn't tell me, should be strangled. So Nasa Achitofel kal v'chomer ba'atzmo. So Achitofel was there, right? We know from the story in Shema, Achitofel was very, very wise. He had this incredible intelligence and insight. So here he did a kal v'chomer. He said, Amar, Uma lasot shalom ben ish leishto amra Torah shmish nichta b'kedusha yimacheh alamayim. So we know by Mei Sotah you're allowed to write Shem Hashem and erase it. And that's just to make peace between a husband and a wife. Kol olam kulo l'kol sheken. So if this is to save the entire world from flooding, so of course you should be allowed to do it, right? Amar le, so he said to David HaMelech, Share, it's allowed. So what happened? Katav Shem Achasfa. So David HaMelech did, Achitofel says it's okay. So he wrote Shem Hashem on a piece of pottery. Shada Atom, he threw it into the depths, and it worked. Nachat bekam aduchte, and the waters were stayed in their place. Va'afilu hachiktiv, and despite the fact that David HaMelech that he was right, that he listened to Achitofel and that it was right, despite that, Va'achitofel re'a ki lo nesta atzato. So later in the story with Avshalom, there's a whole intrigue there where Achitophel's advice is not accepted. So he saw his advice was not accepted. Vayachvosh et chamoro, he saddled his donkey. Vayakom ve'elchel beto, Eliro, he went home. Vaytzavel beto, he put his affairs in order. Vayechanek, and he strangled himself. He committed suicide. So we see here that Achitophel ended up dying through strangulation, which was David HaMelech's curse. Even though David HaMelech's curse was, whoever knows and doesn't tell me should be strangled, And Achitophel knew, but told him, even despite the fact that he told him, he still ended up being strangled. In other words, David HaMelech's curse, even though the condition of it was not met, the condition was whoever doesn't tell me should be strangled, and Achitophel told him. But despite that, the curse itself was fulfilled through Achitophel. Amar Rabbi Abba says, "Kirat Chacham afilo atznai hiba." Similar idea that a curse of a Chacham comes true even if it's unconditioned. Minalan me'eli, from Eli. Damar le'eli l'Shmuel. When Shmuel was a young boy, there's the story where Hashem appears to Shmuel and calls out to him over and over again. He thought it was Eli, because he was still young. He didn't know it was from Hashem, which is a crazy idea, by the way. He has a nevuah from Hashem, and he thinks it's a human, right? So Eli says to Shmuel, "Ko ya'aseh lecha Elokim v'cho yosif im tichached mimeni davar." So Eli said to Shmuel, "May Hashem do this and more to you if you hide anything from me about what Hashem said about what you got in your nevuah." So Shmuel he didn't hide anything from him. He told Eli exactly what the nevuah was. But despite this, Shmuel's sons did not follow in his footsteps. And that is seen as the fulfillment of Eli's curse. Even though it was Atznai, the Tznai was not fulfilled. So we see here two examples, both from the story of Shmuel, David, at that time, of K'lat Chacham Afילו Bechinam Afilo Tznai Ba'a. Okay? I want to read a couple of other interesting examples. There's Gemara Bakot in Perek HaRoeh and Daf Nun Vav and Aleph. It's a whole long Agadata, with a wild Agadata. And we're going to quote just a short section here. There's a guy, what's his name? I didn't bring his name, and I forgot his name. But there's some person who was known, we'll check his name afterwards, he was known as a dream interpreter. He used to go around and interpret people's dreams. And the pretext to this is that anyone who paid him a lot of money, he would interpret the dream favorably. And anyone who didn't pay him a lot of money, he would interpret the dream unfavorably. So he made a good business in that way, that people would go pay him a lot of money, and then he would tell them they would have a good situation. So one time, what was it? I have to check his name afterwards. Anyway, so one time Rava, the Amora, came before him. So Amar Bahade Gavra Demitruchesh Lenisa Lamali. So this guy said, regarding that man Rava who has miracles due to him, I don't want to have anything to do with this guy. Like, I'm not going to start messing with him and try to interpret his dreams or not his dreams. Or I know that it's not going to end well. Bahadi de Kasalik Nafal Sifra Mine. So as this guy was leaving, like a book falls out from his cloak. Ashkechei Rava, and Rava saw something fell. He went and he picked it up. And he saw written in this book, that dreams, the interpretation of the dream follows the math. In other words, there's a phrase in English also, like the dream follows the word in the interpreter. In other words, it's not set in stone in advance what the dream means. It's based on how you interpret it. That retroactively, it's self-fulfilling, is how the dream gets interpreted. And this is in general, in Perek HaRoeh, just as a side point, there's a bunch of Gemaras on this. The Dapim before this also talk about Kol Olech Achar Pitaron, right, that you have, and it's very relevant to stories with Yosef, that through Yosef's interpretation of the dream, is that what made the dream come true, right? All the actions he took, Vayiskor Yosef Chalamot, it's a whole question of itself. But this guy is a charlatan, that's for sure. And so he says, Kol Chalomot Uchir Achar Peh, it falls out of his cloak. Amar, so Rava said to this guy, Rasha, you wicked man, because he saw that he was swindling everybody. So, B'tidach Kaima, V'tzaratan Kulehai, that may all of these evils, may all these bad things come true with you. Kulu mechil nalan bar mibarte d'rechista. He said everything that you said. Oh, excuse me. So the context is Rava did not pay him a lot. So I think he said negative things about Rava earlier. He interpreted the dreams unfavorably. So Rava, when he realized that it's because he was just playing this game, so he said, all the negative things you said about me should be fulfilled through you. I forgive you about everything you said regarding me, except that in regards to the daughter of Chista. That was Rava's wife, and this guy had said that she would die. That Rava's wife would die. So he says, I don't forgive you for saying that my wife would die. And then Rava says, may it be his will that you will be the Hahu Gavra, meaning you, will be handed over to some kingdom that will not have mercy on you. Okay, so he's wishing a lot of ill on this guy. So Amar, so this guy says to himself, "My Avid, what can I do?" Gemira, there's a tradition. Tekilat chacham afilu b'chinam hiba'a. That when a wise person curses, it comes to pass, even if it's b'chinam. V'chol shechen Rava de bedina kalait, and he says, and all the more so Rava, because I am a charlatan, like I am a swindler. He cursed me. It was justified. Amar kum ve'agle. So he said, I'll go into exile. But the Amar galut mechaperet avon. If you go into exile, it atones. So the continuation of the story actually is he goes to this kingdom. There's all these mishaps there, and the kingdom ends up killing him, which fulfills Rava's curse. So it's kind of like the story with Oedipus. In other words, there's this oracle that says Oedipus, when he's born, he's going to grow up to kill his father and marry his mother. So he does everything he can, he could, to avoid that. But the whole story with Oedipus is that through all the steps that he takes, he ends up fulfilling the prophecy. In other words, it's this question of fate. Is fate and prophecy, is it like through people knowing about it, does that bring it to be fulfilled? Right? But this idea that like you can't avoid your fate once you know about it, versus if you never knew, would it come true? So it's also ties to this idea of dreams and this. So again, that's a whole sugya there. But we see here this idea again of kilat chacham afilu b'chinam hiba. Okay. Another example is Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Tzadi Amud Bet. Tamar B'Shmuel Bar Nachmani Amar B'Yonatan Minayin Shekol Midotav Shekadosh Baruch Hu Midah Keneged Midah. How do we know that everything Hashem does is measure for measure? Shneimar. There's this story. This is actually the Haftorah of Kedoshim, which is Mitzvah, which was a couple weeks ago. So Vayomer Elisha Shimud Dvar Hashem. So Elisha makes this prophecy, right? That there was a famine. There was everything was super expensive. Elisha said the price of whatever commodity is going to be this outrageously cheap amount, right? Ke'et machar se'ah solid b'shekel v'satayim sorim b'shekel. Like this unheard of depreciation. B'shar Shomron. In Shomron, uchtiv v'yana shalish asher nish'an al yado. There was this attendant to the king Melch Yisrael who was there. So he answered Isha Elokim. He answered Elisha. V'yomer Hinei Hashem aseh robot b'shamayim eyeh davar kazeh. So even if Hashem makes windows in heaven and makes this produce fall from the sky, you wouldn't have this type of depreciation. How could this ever happen? And Elisha said, right? You'll see it come true, but you won't be able to benefit from it. Right? And the continuation of the story is, right? And that's what happened, that the nation, when this, through the continuation of the story, it ends up there's an enemy army that comes and leaves all of their spoils behind because they're afraid, because this voice comes from heaven and confuses them. So the people realize what happened. There's all this produce, so they trample this guy, and he dies. Right, that's why the Haftorah, right, it ends, Vayamot. It's a very happy ending, but it's like about this guy getting trampled to death. That's what anyway, so how does the Haftorah end? That's great Haftarah. Anyway, so they learn from here this idea that Kol midotav shel Kadosh Baruch Hu midah keneged midah. Why? Because this guy said it can't happen. So exactly what Elisha says, you'll see it, but you won't get to eat from it. Midah keneged midah. But then the Gemara asks, V'dilma kalalat Elisha garmale. But maybe it doesn't teach. You can't infer from this specific instance the general idea that the midot of Hashem are midah keneged midah. Because maybe the reason why this happened was because of Elisha's curse. Why? Right? Because when a wise man makes a curse, that he somehow, again, whatever cause, it ends up coming true. So maybe that's why this guy ended up, not because Hashem does midah keneged midah. So if that were the case, that it's only because Elisha cursed, that's why it happens here. So let's say they trampled him and he died. My bashar, what does it mean they trampled him in the gate? Aliskei shar. In other words, he's talking about the gate of the city, and that's the context there that's teaching me that it's midah keneged midah. Because he talked about it in the gates of the city, that's why he was trampled in the gates of the city. So it's above and beyond the fact that he was cursed by Elisha. But again, here we see another application of this principle. Okay. Now, in the second half of the shir, I'd like to kind of expand this principle to a similar concept, but perhaps is slightly different. And this is based on pasuk in Kohelet in Perak Yud Daf pasuk Hey, which is Keshigaga hayotze mipnei hashalit. The pasuk is, it's like an accident or an error that goes out from the ruler. Right? That the ruler, he decrees something by accident, but then there's ramifications based on that accident. So it's the pasuk in Kohelet, which is taken to mean this general idea. Not that it's a kila chacham bechinam, in the sense that David HaMelech or Elisha or Rava, when they made these curses, they intended exactly what the curse was. It just maybe it would have come true, maybe it didn't. But sometimes also maybe somebody pronounces something and he doesn't intend for the consequences that will happen. So it's like a shgaga. It's an accident, but because it's a chacham, it still ends up happening, unfortunately, like with terrible consequences. So this also teaches the idea that there's power to the utterances of the chacham, even if he doesn't intend behind it, which is a bit different than what we've seen until now. So perhaps the most famous example of this idea is with Yaakov and Rachel. Why? Matan Rachel v'Leah v'tomarna lo. Right, that Rachel and Leah, they say to Yaakov when he wants to flee Lavan, so they say, yeah, we'll go with you. So the Midrash and Bushi Rabbah asks, Lama meta Rachel tchila? Why did Rachel die so prematurely on the way back to Eretz Yisrael? So Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Amar shedibra mipnei achota. So he says, because she was the younger sister, but she spoke out of turn. Right? Vatan Rachel v'Leah. They answered Yaakov and said, yeah, we'll go back with you to Eretz Canaan, but Rachel should have let Leah speak first. Amar lo Rabbi Yossi, ra'ita memecha adam koreh Reuven v'Shimon oleh oto, v'alo Rachel kara v'Rachel anta oto. So Rabbi Yossi, he basically, he challenges this because in a different pasuk, he says he calls out to Rachel and asks Rachel a question specifically. So he says, so Rachel answered. So yeah, Leah was there, but Rachel answered because Yaakov was speaking primarily to Rachel. So it doesn't make sense. Rather, al dated Rabbi Yehuda nicha, al dated Rabbi Yossi, al dated Rabbi Yehuda nicha, al dated Rabbi Yossi. Rather, this actually makes sense according to this other idea. What's the other idea? So the Rabbi Yossi, lo meta ela mikilato shel zaken. That why did Rachel die prematurely? Because of the curse of Yaakov. What was the curse of Yaakov? Shneimar. When Lavan comes, it says, Lama gnavta, why did you steal my idols? So what does Yaakov say? Right? Whoever you find it with shall not live. And he didn't know, he didn't know that Rachel stole them. In other words, Yaakov obviously didn't intend to punish Rachel. Obviously, as the Efet Torah says here. V'chein Yaakov lo kiven rak al asher lakach b'gneva. V'hi lakcha l'shem shemaim k'dei lekaman. Right, so he says Rachel, she took it for holy reasons, right, not to steal it. V'af agav Yaakov amar im asher timtza v'Lavan alo lo yada matzat atrim. So it's not just, and the Efet Torah points out, it's not only that Yaakov didn't intend Rachel when he said whoever's punished, but Lavan didn't even find it basof, right? So whoever you shall find the thing by, he didn't find it, never happened, and Yaakov didn't even have Rachel in mind. Despite that, yesh lomar dekevan matzah kitoniyot bimkoman k'delakaman chala klala. So he brings some midrash here. I wasn't able to find exactly what he's talking about. That Lavan, he found some kiton. I don't know exactly what he's talking about. It's like a jug or something. No, I don't know what that midrash means. I wanted to understand it better.
He found like a piece of like a small part of it.
Maybe found a small piece, so the klala was able to be tofes. But I actually think the Efet Torah doesn't have to go here. Whatever this is, like it's more strong to say he didn't find it at all, and still kilat chacham is tofes. Right? That's how powerful it is. Like not only that it was bechinam, it was bechinam, and he didn't even intend it.
No, but it makes sense what you say. We don't need the
bechinam and shgaga.
Right. It was both. And, yeah. Okay. Another example. Okay, let's talk about it after. Okay, the Gemara in Ketubot. There's an example. Unfortunately, very much in Yanei Dioma actually. Hanish viyuta de'atiyan le'nahardea. There were female captives, hostages that were brought to Nahardea for ransom. Okay, some goyim took them and then brought them for to be redeemed. Otiv avua de Shmuel nitur ba'adayu. So the father of Shmuel, who was in charge at the time, he appointed bodyguards and the Torah to watch over these captives. In other words, okay, we'll redeem them. We want to make sure that nothing happens with them, that the captors don't come and do anything unsavory, so that they can be redeemed and assumed to be pure. Amar le Shmuel. Shmuel said, what's the question? Before you even read the next line, what does Shmuel ask his father? He says, Vada idna man natarinhu. In other words, okay, these people came and they took these women hostage, they captured them, however long they were in captivity, and now they're coming and asking for ransom. So you're setting up guards to make sure that nobody did anything to them. But you have no idea what happened the whole time they were in captivity, so what's the point? It's like maybe something happened when they were in captivity. Amar le, his father said to him, Ilu b'natei chavyan mi havit mezalzel behu kulehai. So he said, so Shmuel's father said to him, if it was your daughters who were taken captive, would you be trying to find reasons to declare them tmeot, or find reasons not to be mekel on them? And I was like, what are you doing? You're trying to say, maybe they were taken captivity. He's like, these women are already, in such a bad state. We want to do whatever we can to help them. That's what his father says to him. So what happens? But this was like an error that went out from the ruler. And Shmuel's own daughters were then later taken captivity and brought to Eretz Yisrael to be ransomed. In other words, Shmuel's father, obviously, when he says this to Shmuel, if it was your daughters who were taken in captivity, would you? He doesn't want Shmuel's daughters to be taken in captivity. It's his own granddaughters, right? But because he spoke so loosely, without taking his words very seriously, so it ended up coming true. That's Kishkaga Yotze Mipi Shalit. And we're going to find Mipnei Shalit, yeah, okay. Right, it says shalit, and the next word is vishtavin, which isn't taken captive. It's like Bible code stuff. Okay. Anyway, okay. Then this is a bit of a funny story, also about Shmuel. Shmuel receives the bad end of the stick of this principle in a few stories now. Okay, he's always the one who ends up getting screwed over. So Moed Katan Daf Yud Chet Amud Aleph. Pinchas achui demar Shmuel itra be'milta. So Moed Katan is dealing with the laws of Avelut in this context. So Pinchas was Shmuel's brother, and an incident occurred to him, which means somebody died in his family. He had someone who passed away. Al Shmuel lemish al ta'ama mineh. So Shmuel went up to pay him the nichum avelim. Chazinhu letorfei dahavu nefisham. So Shmuel saw that his brother's fingernails were long, because he didn't cut them when he was in Avelut. So Amarle, he said to him, why didn't you cut them? Amarle, his brother said to him, Im b'didei have. So his brother said, if what happened to me had happened to you, apparently, if I'm understanding this correctly, Shmuel actually didn't know what had happened to his brother. He went, because he must have heard that something had happened, he went to go find out what happened. He sees his fingernails long, he says, why are your fingernails long? So the brother says to him, if what happened to you, in other words, I guess it's his brother, but the person who died was not related to Shmuel, right? It must have been through marriage, or I don't know. But if it had happened to you, mi mizalzelet be kulehai, would you have spoken so frivolously about the fingernails? So because of this, a relative of Shmuel's died, because he asked so frivolously. So what happens? Al Pinchas achui lemishal tamamine. So then now Pinchas comes to pay respects to Shmuel, because now Shmuel is sitting shiva. What happens? Shaklinu letorfe chaftinu leape. So Shmuel takes his fingernails and he throws them in his brother's face. Amalei says to him, Leit lach brit krutalis fatayim. He says to him, don't you know, brit krutalis fatayim, that what you say with your lips has koach to make things come true. And you said, if it happened to you, look, it happened to me. So his father spoke this way, and then his daughters were taken captive, and then his brother spoke this way, and then some relatives died. So Shmuel is always on the receiving end of this principle. But then in this next source, he gets to pay it forward in the other direction. What happens? Nafla teret roshenu. It's a pasuk from Eicha. There was a gezerah after the Churban Beit HaMikdash. You're not allowed to wear crowns. And there's a machlokes about what type of crown. So Rabbi Yirmiyah the Shav, it's a great place name. Natal ateret zayed k'shal b'rosho. So he took like an olive crown, and he made a crown made out of olive branches.
Like the Greek people. Yeah.
What is that?
Like a Greek.
Yeah. Biduk. So he thought that was not included in the Gzerat Chachamim against crowns. Shama Shmuel heard about this. V'amar v'anichale dirtem Rashe v'lo avid ken. So Shmuel basically says, oh, this guy thinks that he can raise his head and wear a crown like this. So it was kishkagash yatsa mipnei hashalit v'chein hayalei. That he wasn't able to raise his head anymore, which I think means that he was beheaded. So l'chach ne'emar nafla ateret roshenu oy na'lanu ki chatanu. It connects it to the end of the pasuk that oy na'lanu ki chatanu is talking about Shmuel. That Shmuel now spoke so impetuously, and it led to Rabbi Yirmiyah losing his head. Nafla ateret roshenu, but in the literal sense, because he was wearing an ateret, and Shmuel said to him, "How could you be wearing that ateret?" That he lost his head. And through the sin of his speaking improperly, he should have taken his own wisdom that he said to his brother of Brit Kutalis Fatayim. Okay, in the last few minutes we'll get to a couple of other examples and then end off with a bit of an interesting one. So Rabbi Chia bar Abba Chama Chad Sefer Agada. Okay, so Rabbi Chia bar Chama one time he saw a book of Agada. Amar Ima Katav Tavot Titka Yada Dekat Katavta. So he says, even if what's written in this book of Agada is good, may the hand who wrote it be cut off. Because you're not supposed to write down Agada. It's supposed to be passed orally. So Amar Lechad, somebody says to him, Avui dehu gavra katva. So the father of so-and-so wrote this book. So Amar Le, so Bichia bar Abba said to him, Ken amarti. So he says, yeah, so? In other words, okay, great, so his hand should get cut off. What?
How can it be a shgaga? You said yes.
Right, it's a bit weird. In other words...
It's like saying, give me his hand.
Right, like, it's not really kishgaga because he doubles down and he says it again. Yeah, his hand should get cut off, but I guess the idea is, even though he said that, he didn't really mean it. I mean, he was maybe just saying it to express his displeasure at it being written down, but you're right, it's a bit harder here.
It's like maybe you meant that as an expression, but there's an actual guy who wrote it, and this is what they're telling him. And he says, yeah, I meant what I said.
And then they're like, all right, and his hand got cut off.
So the shkaga maybe is like, even if you say it just as an expression, but if you really mean it, like
there is a person, right? There is a guy. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it doesn't negate the shkaga. We understood shkaga as if by mistake. I don't know.
It's not really by mistake as much as without fully comprehending the consequences of what you're saying. Like with going back to Yaakov, he wasn't making a mistake when he said whoever stole this. He just didn't know that it was Rachel who stole it, but he meant what he said. He just didn't understand really the implications of what he was saying. Anyways. Yeah, okay. The story in Ketubot. Yehuda bered Rabbi Chia, Chatnei de Rabbi Yanai. So this person, Yehuda, was the son-in-law of, the father-in-law of Rabbi Yanai. Hava azil v'ati b'bei Rav. He used to go learn in the Beit Midrash of Rav. Chol beishim she'avati l'beitei. He used to come back home every, I think Rash says this means every Friday night, like every Shabbat. He used to come back home to be with his wife. When he used to come, he used to be accompanied by a pillar of fire. He was on a very high level, this guy. He would come home once a week to be with his wife, otherwise he was in the Beit Midrash. So one time, he was so engrossed in his learning that he forgot. And so they didn't see this pillar of fire. So Amar Lu Rabbi Yanai, so Rabbi Yanai said, Kfu mitato, shilmale Yehuda kayan lo bite lo nato. So Rabbi Yanai says, get his shroud ready, because we didn't see this pillar of fire, and he would never have forgotten to fulfill the mitzvah of Ona that he does once a week with his wife. So it must be that he died, even though he was just engrossed in his learning. And so because he said that, he actually ended up passing away. So I want to conclude here with something that's in You'll see why this is a good one. Okay.
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 Okay, I see. I see. Okay.
Bered Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, the son of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Havale Chad Bala'ah. He swallowed a bone by accident. Azal va'ayte Chad min ilain debar pandira. Okay, so one of the students or disciples of somebody named Bar Pandira came.
That is a very, very, very big hint to Otoish.
Okay, good. Yeah, you're spoiling it. Good, yeah.
That's why I said I saw that. I said okay.
Yeah.
Takes the cake.
Okay, so Bar Pandira, we'll see in the Talmud Yerushalmi, it's a bit more explicit. This is Yeshu. Okay, so one of the students of Yeshu, in other words, a disciple, one of the disciples, came la'afka lebale. So he came to remove the bone from Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's son's throat. Amar le, and he did it. He was successful. Amar le, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said to this disciple, Ma amarta le, like, what did you? He uttered some incantation to remove the bone. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said to him, what did you say? So Amar le, pasuk plan batar plan. So he said, I said like a certain sentence after another sentence. I'm not sure what this means, okay? But I said something after something. So Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, V'have naich le dekavre, v'lo havet amar aloi haden psuka. What does Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi say? It would have been better for me to have buried him, in other words, my own son, than for him to have survived through you uttering these psukim over him. Okay? Because he said that, his son ended up passing away. Okay? Let me just read the next one. Okay? The Talmud Yerushalmi has the same midrash, but it's a bit of a different version. Barbre havale bala. Okay, so Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's grandson, this time, instead of his son, has something stuck in his throat. Atachad velachash le bishmei di Yeshu ben Pandera. So if you have any doubt about who this is, now it says Yeshu ben Pandera, Vinsham. And then he starts breathing again. Okay? In other words, he saves this disciple of Yeshu saves the life of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's son.
That they whispered something.
He whispered some spell in the Yeshu, in the name of Yeshu. He uttered. You can't get more explicit than this about what's going on here, right? He's uttering some incantation. He's invoking the name of Yeshu, and he's saving the life of Yeshua ben Levi's grandson. When the bone came out, he said to him, what did you say? Because he uttered it under his breath. Amarle milat plan. I said a spell, a sorcery. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Ma havad le ilu mit v'lo shema hada milta. I would rather that my grandson would have died than to have heard these words and survived. V'havad le ken kishgaga shetzah mipnei hashelit. Yes.
Okay, because it also corresponds with.
That's wild.
I remember exactly where it is, but I remember it's in Masechet Avodah Zarah where it's mentioned where Rabbi Elazar needed some kind of medical procedure. And he was offered this guy by the name of Yaakov Ish Kfar Sakanya. Okay. So again, even there, it's hinted again. The guy was probably one of the apostles, or one of the disciples of
That's wild.
And Rabbi Elazar said, I'd rather live with this or die or whatever, and I'm not going to get any medical assistance from you. So I think it corresponds with what we see here. But I think in general, the whole idea of whether it's spells or it's some kind of medical knowledge that we see that even though as if obviously because it has to do with a lot of the Christian if you like
healing stories
of healing people and of healing people and giving and especially giving assistance to the poor and the needy and etc. So I think it's this thing where the Chazal say in general, I'd rather my son, my grandson, whatever, my family, me would die than get any assistance from you. That means it's the whole process of distancing themselves from, if you like, the big rift
Right.
It goes, you really see this within there from within the.
It's interesting. Like, is it a valid power that existed?
That's
the interesting part.
So why is this such a fascinating final measure? Because everything up until this last one, who is the one that, it's being pronounced about, like the reason why Kishgaga Yotz Mipi Hashali is you should have been more careful with your words. You shouldn't have talked so impetuously about your daughter, or you shouldn't have talked so frivolously about your wife. Or you should. And it was like people that you love that are important to you, you need to speak carefully about. But here he's bad mouthing, the apostles, and still he gets punished. Like it's still, even when you're saying, like, I'd rather, when you're pronouncing something against a threat to Judaism. Yeah. Even then, you have to. There's consequences to what you say. Even when you're cursing out like a Yeshu ben Pendera's students. Even then, your son gets punished. To show even when you're polemicizing, you still have to be careful with how you talk. Like that's a chiddush. Yeah, and then the question is, from this story, it seems that there was koach to this, right?
That's another layer.
He was able to save him. Right?
We know there was a power. Like you see this also with all the mechashvim, Mitzrayim, and all this stuff. It's some powers.
But that was biblical times. This is like this is in the times of the Romans, like modern.
Well, you see where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai comes out of the cave and he kills people just by looking at them.
But that was a Jewish story. Here we hear about someone who's not.
Here's someone who we claim wasn't healed someone.
Yeah, there's a lot of. I'm sure you can interpret it as, was there a force or was it just some kind of
without
doing something that was based on some kind of knowledge and just using these spells to to enforce it, so to speak.
You're Pashup shot. He healed him. The Tanaim felt that the magic they did.
But then he died.
I always invoke the Rambam and the necromancer, and with the Shaul. I think that